Hi, I'm Lizzie Harper from lizzieharper.co.uk, and in response to a request from somebody who follows me on YouTube, I've decided to do just a couple of basic botany films. So I'm not going to be drawing or painting like I normally do, not today, but this is a basic introduction to the anatomy of flowers, what you need to look for. It's also going to cover a little bit on different flowering families, but it's mostly going to be about the structure of flowers and what to look for when you're busy trying to draw and paint them. So yeah, hopefully it'll be helpful. So in order to get going, what we need to do is figure out the different parts of flowers, and then what we'll do is I'll try and show you where these different structures are in lots of different flowers. Now, as you know, as you can see from this little teacup, there's an enormous variety of shape and of colour and of size in amongst flowers, but there are some things which are common to absolutely every flowering plant, and that's what we're going to start by looking at. So if we take a look at, these are handouts, and throughout this film I'm going to be referring to these handouts. They're going to be available for you guys to download as a free resource. There are web links which will be in the write-up below the film on YouTube, so do feel free to avail yourself of that resource. It's all very well me talking, but if you can't go back and check it yourself, what use is that to you? Right, so I think we'll use this one actually. So if you cut a flower in half, what do you see? So there are some structures that you will instantly recognise. These are the petals. All the petals together are known as the corolla. Straightforward enough. These are often the parts that are brightly coloured, and when you're drawing a flower, it's always important to count and see more or less how many there are. Underneath the petals, tucked away sometimes, there are these, often green but not always, little structures which are called sepals. So sepals all together are known as the calyx, and they are the green bit often that often encases a flower and a bud, and they also they tend to be tucked below the petals and give it support. In some cases they do quite cool things like fuse into a tube, but we'll get to that later. The male part of the flower is known as the stamen. So one of these little elements here, let's zoom in a little bit. One of these elements is known as a stamen, right? So the stamen consists of a filament, which is just the stalk, and this structure on top, which is called the anthers. Now what they do is super important. They produce pollen. So the pollen will be produced by the anthers, and depending on what sort of flower you have, you're going to have different numbers of stamens producing pollen. So that's the male part. Now what happens is the males produce their pollen, and that'll be taken either by a pollinator, like a bee perhaps, or sometimes it'll be wind pollination. Pollination is a whole different topic. And it will land on the female part of another flower in the same species, which it can then fertilise. Now, before I just mention how that happens, I'm going to show you the female anatomy of the flower. So, which is sometimes known, I believe, as the carpel. So, it's made of this long process here, which has got a sticky top. So this is called the style, and this is the sticky stigma. This is the place where the pollen from the anthers will land. Hopefully not necessarily from the same plant. You don't necessarily want to self-fertilise. When the pollen lands on the sticky stigma, amazing biochemical things happen, and it burrows all the way down the style until it hits the ovule. Now this down here is called the ovule, and once fertilized it will become the seed. And obviously the fruits vary depending on what plant you're looking at. The whole structure here is known as the ovary. The female parts of the flower, so the sticky stigma, the long tube, the style, the ovary and the ovule, all together are known as the pistil, or as a carpel. an individual carpel. If you have a group of them all together, or that entire area, the whole female area, is known as a gynoecium or gynoecium. Gynoecium? I never know how to pronounce it. Let's look a bit closer at a real life specimen. So this is some pear blossom from my tree, and in fact it's the same family as the cross section of the flower I just showed you, so that should make it a little easier to follow. So first, if we turn it upside down, these green bits on the back, do you remember I was talking about the calyx and the sepals? So each of these green things is a sepal, and the whole lot of that green structure, which in the buds you can see here more or less encase the buds, those are called the calyx. And then in a ring inside of that we have the petals. In this case, the pear, it's a member of the rose family, Rosaceae, and all the Rosaceae flowers have 5 petals. So that's fair enough. So there are the petals. Now if we go a little further in, we're going to look for some of those structures that we're looking at on the handout. So let's do the male structures first. These red processes just here, you see, these are the anthers. So these are the pollen producing parts of the male structure. And these long sticks, it's probably clearer to see it on that, those long pale sticks, those are the filaments. So each of these is an anther. So you can see in this flower there are lots and lots of different stamens. It's one of the things to do with the rose family, they have a lot of stamens. In the middle here, these structures are the stigma and the style. So these will go down and join the ovary, and in due course, if they get pollinated, then the pollen will travel down from the sticky top into the ovary, where it'll fertilise the ovule and eventually grow into a seed. Here's a primrose. Let's see if we can see those structures. On the back here, can you see? So these are the sepals. Yeah. And this is the calyx, but it's glued together in a way into a tube. And that's called a fused calyx. And the same with the petals. So we've got our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. But look, they're fused into a tube. That's called a corolla tube. If we cut one open to look for the structures inside, I made a bit of a pig's ear of this actually, but if we look in here you can see, so I've taken the flower off. Here you've got the calyx, yeah, and this here you've got the ovary. Coming up there is the style, sorry, and there's the sticky stigma at the top. Okay, so I hear you cry, where are the male parts? Where are the pollen producing things? And the answer is they're right here. So can you see they're quite weirdly, they're almost attached to the corolla tube, but there they are. Those are the anthers, and there's a very, very short filament in this case. Also, actually, if you are doing botany and if you're doing botanical illustration, be prepared to pull your flowers apart. It really is almost the only way to figure out what's going on. Here are some illustrations that I've done that might help make it clearer again. Let's just look at a load of them. So this is a blackberry flower. It's got 5 petals and it's got all these anthers, yeah, the anthers coming out attached to the tip of the stamen, and in the middle that's where all the stigmas and so on are. And this is a cross section of the same plant. You can see the corolla or the petals, the sepals or the calyx. All of these are part of the female structure which attaches to the ovaries. So these are all little sticky stigmas at the end of styles, and all of these are stamens made of a filament and an anther. Again, here's a cross section of a bridewort. Petals, sepals, stamen, ovules, and there we have the style with the stigma above. You can see in the illustration of the lone flower the same thing. This is a stonecrop flower. 4 tiny petals, 4 sepals, stamen with the anthers, and there's the female part consisting of the style and the stigma and going down to the ovary. Bridewort, Same again. I mean, you can see patterns emerging, can't you? The long things are the stamens. In the heart of the flower, you've got the female part. Then you've got the petals on the outside of that. And beyond that, in the outermost whorl, you've got the calyx. When we're drawing flowers, another thing we have to think about is where are all the processes, the petals and the stamens, in relation to the carpel, the female part. Is the ovary and where the seeds will develop, is it below the petals, as with this apple blossom, you see? So this bit will end up growing into the apple underneath the calyx. Or is it above? So, for example, this is a celandine, which is a member of the Ranunculaceae family. And you can see here are all the stamens, all that stuff, all the anthers. And here are the petals. But each of these, you see, there's not really any structure below that will grow into a fruit. There are there we go, there's the calyx. But the part that will grow into the fruit is above the petals, if it stops wiggling about. So all of these will grow into a fruit. And in that case, you call it a superior ovary. So the ovaries and the female parts are above the petals. If they're below the petals, they're an inferior ovary, as with most of the flowers I've got here. So with this periwinkle, inferior ovary, the seeds are going to develop down there below the petals. The flowers that I have here fall into that category. Another thing to think about and to look out for when you're drawing flowers is the flower just one lone flower at the end of a stalk, a little bit like perhaps the snake's head fritillary here. That's one bloom at the end of a stalk. Or is it a cluster of flowers? A cluster of flowers, which make up one flowering structure, is known as an inflorescence. So for an example, this is a hyacinth. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. This is a hyacinth, and that is the inflorescence of the hyacinth. It's a cluster of flowers. It's not just one. Again, with a bluebell, a lone bluebell on the end of a stalk, you wouldn't even necessarily recognise it as a bluebell. But here, it's in a cluster. It's an inflorescence. Likewise, grape hyacinth. If you've noticed that you're drawing an inflorescence rather than a lone flower, another thing to consider is what's flowering first, the flowers at the top or the flowers at the bottom. And there's often patterns to this. Here are some examples of inflorescences from my sketchbook studies. So this is a false acacia, Robinia pseudoacacia, and all of these flowers together make a drooping inflorescence. Or what about something like the Persian hogweed or the hogweed? So these are the umbellifers again, the Apiaceae, the cow parsley family. The shape of this domed head in this particular species is very, very distinctive. So that makes it possible for you as a botanist or as an observer to know that it's Persian hogweed rather than another hogweed with a less domed inflorescence. This is bridewort, Spirea salifolia, and again it's got an inflorescence. Just one of those flowers at the end of a stem would be inconceivable that you would know that that was bridewort. But you can see there's a little cluster and there's the cross section we looked at earlier. So that's the inflorescence of this particular plant. Lupins, again, there we go. One lupin flower would look odd, but there you go, in an inflorescence, that's a pyramidal inflorescence. There are lots of Latin terms used to describe inflorescences, but we're not actually going to get into them right now. Even trees will have flowers and inflorescences. So this is the inflorescence of the Acer pseudoplatanus, which droops down. Can you see? It's a sort of pendulous collection of flowers. And because it's that sort of elongate shape, it can be told instantly apart from another very similar tree, which is Acer platanoides, which has these perky little sort of almost globes of flowers. That's the shape of their inflorescence. So yeah, look out for the inflorescence. If you watched my last film, which is about leaves, you'll have heard me talk about the difference between monocots and eudicots. Monocots are often thought of as just like grasses, sedges, and things like that, but they're not. They also include a lot of flowering plants, some of the showier ones, in fact. You can often tell a monocot by its seedling, which will only be one-leaved, rather than a eudicot, two-leaved ones. And also the flowers tend to be in multiples of 3, rather than in multiples of 4 or 5, like the eudicots. Now, one of the things that's quite cool about the monocots is it's quite hard to tell whether or not they have calyxes. So do you remember when we were talking about things like these flowers, like the apple blossom, these green bits at the behind the petals? Those are the calyx, right? With monocots, it's quite hard to tell the calyx from the petals. So this, for example, is a hyacinth, which is a monocot. And can you see? It's got a fused kind of, we would have called it either a fused calyx or a fused corolla. But which is it? So are these petals or are they sepals? Well, in fact, even though they look identical, the inner circle of 3 is the petals. The outer circle of 3 is the calyx. But they're so similar that it's a separate term that's used for monocots. And that term is tepal, T-E-P-A-L. Snake's head fritillary. Again, at the back, you can't see any like green protective calyx, can you? But if you look here, how many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 tepals. This is the female process. So this is the pistil. And it's above the ring of tepals and above the ring of stamens. So it's a superior ovary. If we look at this ridiculously overblown tulip that's come out with some gay abandon here, again, it's just perfect to show us what we're talking about. There's the inner circle, 1, 2, 3 of 3 tepals, an outer circle, 1, 2, 3 tepals, and we're calling them tepals because we can't tell if they're sepals or petals. They look identical. And there in the middle, what do we got? Let's do a bit of a recap. We got your stamens, and again, multiples of 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your stamen with the filament, the anther, which produces the pollen. Can you see it? No, you can't see it, but these little, it's just sort of blackish. And here, it's all sort of fused, multiples of 3, 1, 2, 3. This is the fused female pistil with these sticky bits, which are the stigma. So again, it's another example of a superior ovary. This is the second of 3 handouts that you will be able to access if you go to my website and download it. This one, again, it just sort of, it's a bit of a recap on the parts of the flowers up here, so we've done that. But here it also starts to discuss the diversity of flower shape, and I think we've seen something of that just with the examples that we've gone through so far. At the very bottom, there's a tip on drawing flowers. This is like a cup-shaped flower. Just you start with your basic shape, and then you work into it by adding the right number of petals, and then you put the other bits and pieces into the middle. So I just thought it might be quite useful. And the last handout that I'll be making available is this one, and this one is on the diversity of flower shape, diversity and form. So when you look at your flower, you need to think, is it radially symmetrical, which is known as actinomorphic, like this one, your primrose, bilaterally symmetrical, like your vetch flower. So you could cut it down the middle and it would look the same on either side. Bilaterally symmetrical flowers are known as zygomorphic. So that's the first thing to think of when you're looking at the shape of the flower you've got in front of you. And then, if you want to, you can go crazy and you can find Latin terms to describe each and every shape flower that you could care to mention. Yeah, so these terms that I've given you a sheet of, you can learn them if you want, or you can just look at them and refer to them. But they're quite helpful and they will help you find your way through flower identification guides, perhaps. So yeah, feel free to download that and refer to it whenever you need. Another thing to consider when you're doing plant illustrations is what family of flower are you looking at? So there are different plant families and they will often have similarities. They'll have the same shapes, the same petals, the same characteristics. It can really help. I'm absolutely not a good enough botanist to guide you through each and every flowering family. But I will touch on just a few here to show you a little bit more about them. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Ranunculaceae, which is the buttercup family. So this flower we were looking at earlier, the lesser celandine, this is in the Ranunculaceae, and so are clematis, and so are all the buttercups. And so they tend to have cup-shaped flowers. They often, not the lesser celandine mind you, have 5 petals. And they have in the middle a dense cluster of stamens, which we've already talked about here. And you can see them there, and you can also see them on this clematis illustration. They have a superior ovary, which we talked about. So the seeds are going to grow above the rest of the flower. And yeah, it includes things like marsh marigold and all the buttercups. The next family we're going to look at is the Brassicacier, or the cabbage family. It used to be known as the cruciferae. And these flowers are all the same in that they have 1, 2, 3, 4 petals and 4 sepals. The petals are arranged in a cross, hence them used to be being called a cruciferae. And they've got 4 stamens as well. Yeah, this one here is a very common little plant, which is shepherd's purse. And again, you see that distinctive shape, 1, 2, 3, 4 little petals, and they're arranged in a cross. So it's going to be a brassica, or a Brassicacier, or a cruciferae, if you wish. Another common family is Rosaceae, and that's a very, very varied family. There's loads of cool plants in the Rosaceae family. The ones I've got here are apple blossom, obviously pear blossom, cherry blossom, they're in the same group. This is a wild strawberry, which is also in the Rosaceae family. This is quince, which I believe is also in the Rosaceae family. How can you tell if it's in the rose family? Well, the flowers are radially symmetrical, so you can see very clearly from the wild strawberry. And they have 5 petals and lots of stamens going on the inside. Yeah, clusters of them. You can see there as well. Yeah. And some examples, other than those ones, that I've illustrated include Cotoneaster. That's in the rose family. Dwarf serviceberry, that's in the rose family. Again, look, you can see by the picture of the fruit, they've got inferior ovaries. Blackberries, that's a whole different nest of stuff to do with fruiting structure, but they're in the rose family as well. Again, all those stamens, 5 petals, and the radial symmetry. Bridewort, even. This one that we were looking at earlier because of its inflorescence. That's also in the rose family. Next up is the pea family for Basier. And they've got very differently shaped flowers. You can see from the ones we've looked at so far, they are bilaterally symmetrical rather than radially symmetrical. And in this family includes things like vetches and clovers, gorse. If I take a look at an illustration I've done, maybe I can explain why the flowers, even though they are quite different there, they all have the same structure. So the back petal here is known as the standard. Either side, the pea families, the flowers will have wings, which go either side, and then this area here is called the keel. So those make up the structure of every single flower in the pea family. Inside the flower, you will find that the 5 sepals have been fused into a calyx tube, which has been cut away here. And there are 10 stamens, the base of which is also often fused. So in this group, we've got the Falsicacia, and we've got our vetches, like the bush vetch just here. And we also have gorse. That's another for Basier. And we also have the lupin that we were looking at a little earlier. But the cow parsley family, the Apiaceae, which used to be known as the umbelliferas, they are also quite instantly recognisable. So they tend to have these white flowers with 5 petals, and often they'll have these little flowers with 1 longer petal on the outside. And they're all held in these kind of differently shaped inflorescences, which are almost always white. Sometimes they'll be pink. It's the carrot family, basically. This is a hogweed. So yeah, they're definitely, they often have pinnate or divided leaves as well. This pretty plant, the yellow archangel, is a member of the mint family, the Lamiaceae. And they all have these similarly shaped flowers. Can you see they've kind of got hooded tops, and then these different shapes down below, and the stamens tend to be, there we go, hidden underneath the hood. Here's an illustration of another plant in the same family, which is the skullcap. You can see there it's the same shape, and in a cross section again you can see these are kind of the stamens are hidden within. So yeah, that's the mint family, and that also includes things like dead nettles as well. There's a family which you will have noticed we haven't touched on, which is called the Asteracier. It used to be called the Compositae. They're composite flowers, and I'm really not going to go there right now. But they include things like dandelions and daisies and loads of flowers, actually. And what's extraordinary about these is each one of these little, you would have thought petals, they're not. Each one of these little things has its own stamen and its own carpel. So each one of these is a flower in its own right. So that's just crazy. And you have different sorts. So you have each one of these things is called a floret. You can see the curvy little thing there. So you have disc florets and ray florets, as in with the dandelions. Here's an illustration of some ragwort, and you can see here, whoops, these ones, the outside ones, ray florets. Each of these is a tiny flower, and the inside ones are known as disc florets, and each of these is a tiny flower with its own ovary. Another example of the composite flowers or Asteraceae, zoom out, is the sow thistle. Some of them only consist of ray florets, like the sow thistle. Some have a mix of disc and ray florets, and some are only disc florets, although that's much rarer, things like pineapple weed. But do not worry and do not fret about them, but just bear in mind that they exist. If there's something and you can't instantly see, hang on, where are those stamens? Have a little think. Might it be a composite flower? Might it be a member of the Asteraceae? Finally, with the flowering plant families, I'm just going to take a look at a couple that fall into the monocot. Into the monocot division. So this is the flower of the Elodea, and can you see, do you remember we were saying that monocots often have multiples of 3? So again, as an example there, 1 2 3 1 2 3. And another one is the duck potato, which is this plant, which is another water plant actually. It's a member of the water plantain family, and again, there we go, pretty good idea that it's going to be in the monocots. Look, there we go, 1 2 3, the flowers have 3 petals. So there you go, there's your whistle stop introduction to flowers, to the male parts, the anthers and the filament which make up the stamen, and the female part, the stigma, the style, the ovary and the ovule, which make up the carpel or the gynecium. So hopefully that will help, and also show you where the petals come in and where the sepals or the calyx comes in as well. Bit of an overview of the families as well, but I would refer to a guidebook if you want more information on that. I'm not a botanist, I'm an illustrator, so if I've made mistakes, I do apologise. Do remember to download my handouts, which will be available, and there'll be a link to them in the write-up below this film. So finally, the things that we need to think about when we start drawing a flower. What do we want to think about? I've made a little list, so I'm going to be looking down. So first thing we're going to think about is shape, and we've sort of discussed shape, number of petals, and also round or bilaterally symmetrical, radially symmetrical, all that stuff. What shape is it? What colour is it? And is the colour the same throughout, or is it darker in some areas and lighter in other areas? Is there mottling and speckling? Think about the colour of the petals, obviously, but also the colour of things like the anthers of the stamens. They vary quite a lot. And also the calyx is quite often a different colour or flushed with red quite frequently. Worth looking to see what's going on there as well. How much space is there between the inflorescence, or the one flower, if that's how it presents itself, and the leaves? think about the size of the flower in relationship to the size of the leaves below it. Don't just make the flower enormous and the leaves tiny, because the flower's more fun to draw. Easy to do, that one is. I've fallen into that trap. If you've got something with an inflorescence, are all the flowers out at the same time? Or is there a regimented way of them opening? And if there is, are they opening at the top first, going down the stem, or from the bottom of the stem, going up? Think about a foxglove, perhaps. Yeah, and just sort of think about shape, think about colour, think about proportion. And I would always suggest that you go and look at a guidebook and read the botanical description, which hopefully might make a little more sense to you after these two films that I've done, the one on leaves and this one. And see what you're meant to be looking for. Use your eyes, draw what you see rather than what you think is there, but do refer to the botany. It's going to make your job so much easier as an illustrator. And the main thing is just enjoy what you do. Look, keep looking, just keep looking, keep drawing and keep doing it. You'll get better, and you will also learn a lot about plants by drawing them. Thanks for joining me for this film today, which has been a brief introduction to flowers. Hopefully there's been some stuff which will help you as you move forward drawing and painting flowers, looking for those structures across whatever subject you're painting, and just looking, tearing the plant apart to see what's going on inside. If you'd like to see more of my work, please visit lizzieharper.co.uk, where you'll see my blogs and you'll see loads of examples of my work, and there are originals which are available to buy. For the handouts that I've kept mentioning, there's a link in the write-up below this film, so please do avail yourself of those. Thanks so much for your time. And do feel free to like and subscribe and leave comments. It's always good to hear from you, and thanks so much. Hopefully you'll be off there drawing more flowers in the sunshine soon. See you next time. Bye.